This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Wuhan inspecting measures to control the COVID-19 epidemic. Sudan's Prime Minister survives an assassination attempt. How might this impact Sudan's transition to democracy? And Ethiopians remember the 737 MAX crash a year on at a wreckage site. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, South African Airways kicks off a retrenchment process as the carrier battles to stay afloat. And in sports, South Africa's Proteas taming expectations ahead of Thursday's opening encounter against India. In our top story, Chinese President Xi Jinping is visiting Wuhan for the first time since the coronavirus outbreak began there. Earlier, Xi met patients and medical workers at Shenshan, one of the hospitals rapidly built to treat COVID-19 patients. He encouraged medical workers to remain confident in the battle against the virus as he inspected the operations in response to the outbreak. President Xi also visited quarantined residents in a local community and addressed prevention and control measures as well as people's livelihoods. Wuhan is the capital of Hubei, which remains the worst affected province in China. However, the number of new cases has dropped dramatically. Well, China reported a record low of 20 new cases and 17 deaths on Monday. Most of them are in Hubei province, where the outbreak began in December. The country's total number of confirmed cases now stands at nearly 81,000, but more than 70% of patients have recovered, while more than 3,000 have died. Well, let's bring you more on this. We're now joined here in our Nairobi studio by Professor Peter Kagwanja. He's the President and the CEO of the Africa Policy Institute. Professor, always a pleasure to have you with us. We've just seen that President Xi Jinping is visiting Wuhan for the first time since the outbreak began. This, as we know, has been the epicenter of this somewhat devastating outbreak. But surely his visit is a sign of Chinese leaders' confidence that they do have this under control.
Let me start by congratulating the people of China for facing what I would see as the greatest threat to their society. Had the coronavirus not been contained from the word go, there was a possibility that it would have become an existential threat to the Chinese people and to humanity as large. So therefore, from day one, the world worked with China step by step to see how it's going to perform. And the fact that it's rolling back the threat in a very dramatic way is beginning to give hope not only to the Chinese people but to the world at large, that coronavirus is, after all, not going to be that existential threat to humanity as such. It is also a statement about the capacity of the Chinese state, the resilience of the Chinese people. It's also a statement about the cohesiveness of the policy-making part and the policy implementation. One example literally tell it all about how fast the hospitals were constructed to contain the disease, how the new soldier in the Chinese society is the medic. The medical doctor is the new soldier, the new warrior, basically waging a war against coronavirus and winning. And that is very inspiring for most of us who've been watching China. And the fact that the President Xi Jinping has decided to go to Wuhan is announcing to the world the victory. Basically, it looks like, you know, the victory announcement, the Second World War, the First World War, that we are, there are some problems to solve, but we have almost calm the disease.
And so, as you suggest, perhaps an almost victory announcement for China, but the situation is quite different in other parts of the world where the outbreak seems to be escalating. Even here in Africa, we are seeing a growing number of cases in some countries. What do you think are the key lessons that Africa needs to take now at this stage from China in order to make sure that this outbreak does not get out of control?
Now, what seems to have worked in China is not the treatment, because there is no known antiviral treatment for the disease, and there is no known vaccine against the disease. What has worked are the traditional methods of quarantining, curfews, prevention, isolation, in order to ensure that those who have the disease don't pass it on to those who don't have. Obviously, there are issues that have been raised about human rights, which I think are completely misplaced, because the ultimate right that human beings enjoy is the right to life. And containing coronavirus is essentially entrenching or championing that fundamental right. So what the lesson the other parts of the world need to learn is that you cannot defeat coronavirus until you take preventive measures. And the effectiveness of that preventive measure will also depend on how well coordinated the state is, how the government machineries, how the systems go out. In Africa, it is even more telling that here we are overwhelmed by other diseases. We've just recovered from Ebola. I don't know in other parts of Africa where it's not there. Malaria is still a big issue here. And so to say, HIV has been an issue we have been fighting for the last 10 years. But what seemed to be lesson coming from China is that effective preventive measures, effective measures to contain contagious disease can win a war, even when there are no cure or antiviral measurements that would be taken. So we are very proud of the Chinese people in terms of where they have recovered and their resilience. It's wonderful.
And let's hope we do learn some lessons from their containment practices as far as the coronavirus is concerned. Thank you so much, Professor Peter Kagwanja, joining us here in our Nairobi studio. Now, Burkina Faso has reported its first 2 cases of the coronavirus, becoming the 6th country in sub-Saharan Africa to be affected by the virus. The country's health minister, Claudine Log, has said that the 2 patients, a husband and wife, had recently returned to Burkina Faso from a trip to France. They are currently in isolation.
In the light of this situation, we would like to make public the laboratory test results of these cases that tested positive for coronavirus 2019. The 3 people who have traveled are people of Burkinabe nationality with black skin. We are stating this because it has been said that black skin is resistant to the disease.
Now, Tunisia has confirmed 3 more cases of COVID-19 in the country, bringing the total number of patients there to 5. The health ministry confirmed its first case just late last week. The condition of the first patient is said to be improving. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi reports from Tunis.
Health authorities stated that tests have confirmed that the Tunisian traveler from Italy and 3 others have tested positive for COVID-19 and have been quarantined at a university hospital.
The duration of treatment of people infected with the new coronavirus is longer than that of seasonal influenza. The ministry has taken all preventive measures to prevent the spread of the virus and the infection of other people.
The Ministry of Health also added that the condition of the first patient affected by COVID-19 is improving and is still under observation at the university hospital in the coastal city of Sousse.
The medical staff had confirmed that the patient who had recently returned from Italy is improving and that he is still undergoing his treatment in good condition at the hospital.
The Commission of Administrative Organization and Armed Forces Affairs at the Tunisian Parliament urged the government to provide all necessary means to prevent the COVID-19 outbreak in the country.
We've noticed the prompt reaction of the government. A corona outbreak is a threat to national security and public health. All state services are on alert.
Over 2,000 individuals have been quarantined in the different regions of Tunisia, including 750 persons who have completed the monitoring period and were allowed to break the self-isolation. Health Minister Abdelkader declared that all the tests carried out on the family members of the two patients infected with the COVID-19 were negative. Al-Mekki stressed the readiness of the government structures and hospitals in all regions across the country to deal with any infection or suspicion of contamination by the virus. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Here's a quick look now at the latest COVID-19 figures and the number of countries affected as the virus spreads in Africa.
Egypt has been hardest hit after confirmed cases rose sharply from 48 on Sunday night to 55 on Monday. One person, a German national, has died there. Algeria is the second highest with 20 patients. 16 of the cases are from one family in Blida province, south of the capital. South Africa has just announced 4 new cases, raising its total to 7. The 4 were part of a group that travelled to Milan for vacation. 3 new cases have been confirmed in Tunisia, bringing the total number to 5. On Sunday, Tunisia counted its second case from a citizen returning from Italy, one of the worst affected countries so far. The first patient was also a Tunisian returning from Italy and is still under observation. Senegal reported its 3rd and 4th cases of the virus on Wednesday after confirming their first case about a week ago. Burkina Faso on Monday reported 2 of its first cases. The 2 patients are a couple that recently returned from a trip to France. Another case of the virus has been reported in Nigeria, bringing the total number there to 2. Nigeria was the first sub-Saharan country to confirm a case on the continent last month. Another Nigerian tested positive while in the US. However, officials say it's unlikely he contracted the disease while in Africa. Cameroon confirmed 2 of its only cases hours apart on Friday. The first case was a French national who arrived in the capital Yaoundé on Friday 24th. The second patient, a Cameroonian citizen, was said to be in close contact with the first victim. Morocco, on the other hand, counted 1 more person with the disease. This brings the total number of infection to 3 in the country. And Togo has quarantined 1 person who fell ill as a result of the virus. The 42-year-old woman recently travelled to France, Turkey, Benin and Germany. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, as the continent's cases of the coronavirus continue to rise, the Africa Centre for Disease Control and Prevention is stepping up efforts to assist affected countries. At the same time, it's encouraging nations that remain free of the virus to tighten surveillance and put in place other preventative measures. CGTN's Coletta Wanjoyi spoke to Dr. Ahmed Ogwal, the Deputy Director of the Africa CDC, on just how prepared the continent is.
Currently, we are working with the countries at 3 different levels. The first level is building capacity for enhanced surveillance. That means that at points of entry, the gadgets that are required, the knowledge that is required, and the facilities that are required to contain any possible case, we are working with governments across Africa to be able to build that. The second level is laboratory diagnosis. Initially, we only had 2 labs that could be able to diagnose COVID-19. Today, 43 countries can be able to do that. And by the end of this month, we think we'll have reached all 55 member states. The third level is preparedness in general. This means engaging with the public so that they get the correct information. This means engaging with health workers so that they are able to protect themselves as they deal with possible cases. This means the government sets in place machinery that releases resources as they are required. We have guidance that we have shared with member states, and most member states are following this guidance, and therefore preparedness is increasing, not as fast as we would want, but preparedness is increasing in Africa.
Much as we have been prepared to a certain extent, what are some of the challenges that we are foreseeing?
Let me start with Africa CDC. The kind of resources we require to be able to prepare countries effectively and for us to be able to give support at both continental and regional level, we do not have enough. Indeed, we barely have a quarter of what we need. Countries, on the other hand, are probably doing a little worse. This is because health systems are weak, and the preparation that is required to make the health systems ready for a significant number of COVID-19 patients is high. But we are encouraging countries to do this in a stepwise fashion as we mobilize resources. To this end, we are talking with partners, both in the philanthropy space, in the development space, in the humanitarian space, and in the private sector. We are talking with partners so that they can be able to avail the resources that are required.
Well, let's turn to Italy now, where riots have erupted at 24 prisons. Italy, of course, is the worst hit country outside China. At least 6 inmates have been killed, while 20 others escaped in unrest related to coronavirus containment measures. Meanwhile, as authorities step up restrictions to try and curb the spread of the virus, Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has announced a nationwide quarantine, extending restrictions in the north to the entire country. Ross Cullen has more from Rome.
Day 1 today of the nationwide lockdown. Previously, these measures had only applied to some northern regions of Italy, affecting 16 million people, but now the entire population, 60 million people, are affected by this nationwide quarantine. The measures, including all schools, are going to be closed, cinemas, theatres, gyms are closed as well, weddings and funerals are suspended. All but essential travel is banned as well. If you are moving around the country, you have to give express justification as to why you are moving. Italians urged to stay at home as well and try to combat this virus and the crisis in the country more broadly, in the healthcare system specifically, which is now dealing with the largest outbreak of the coronavirus in Europe, more than 9,000 cases in total as well, and more than 450 people have now lost their lives. And the Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte bringing in these measures to try to alleviate some of that pressure on the healthcare system. Well, if we look at the schools issue, Jonathan, as well, so schools and all universities are closed until at least the 3rd of April, and parents now being urged to look after those children, leave work or work from home. It really is disruptive as well. If you look at bars and restaurants, they're only going to be allowed to open until at least, to 6 p.m, and that's provided they can assure the authorities that customers in those bars or restaurants will be at least a metre away from each other. So it really is disruptive at the moment on a broader scale, particularly when you're talking about travel within the country. Flights are still operating though, coming in and out of Italian airports, and the buses were still running this morning on our streets here in Rome, although it has to be said there were only a couple of people travelling on those buses we saw, but people trying to get on with it as best they can. The city is noticeably quieter as well, particularly now the spring season has started. The weather is getting better. We should be seeing millions of tourists in these next couple of months coming to Rome for all the architecture as well, and the history here specifically in Rome and the country more broadly. Places like Milan for fashion and Venice as well for the architecture and the canals. That's just not an option now with the country on lockdown and tourist destinations closed. So the city is noticeably quieter. Romans here specifically and Italians more broadly trying to react to this unprecedented measures as best they can.
Well, after the break, we turn our attention to some other news making headlines across the continent. Coming up, Sudan's Prime Minister survives an assassination attempt. And Ethiopians remember the 737 MAX crash a year on at a wreckage site.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. We
start in Burkina Faso now, where the military is trying to restore order following attacks on 2 villages in the north of the country. At least 43 people were killed on Sunday after an unidentified group attacked the villages of Dingila and Barga near the border with Mali. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Burkina Faso is in the process of introducing a scheme where local volunteers will be given weapons and 2 weeks training to combat jihadists. Sudan's Security Council has condemned the attempted assassination of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. An emergency meeting was held after the incident with the Defense Council. The council said it will request help in order to find out who is responsible for this attack. PM Hamdok was transferred to a secure location after the attempt on his life in the capital, Khartoum. His convoy was hit by gunfire and a projectile. It's not yet clear who is responsible. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
Sudan's Prime Minister has survived an assassination attempt after his convoy was attacked in the capital, Khartoum.
The Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok's convoy was targeted this morning in a terrorist attack as he was heading from his house to the Prime Minister's office. The convoy was targeted by a terrorist explosion and gunfire below Koba Bridge. The Prime Minister was not injured. Neither was the group accompanying him, except one member of the entourage who was slightly injured on his shoulder as he fell off his motorbike.
A short while after the incident, Abdallah Hamdok tweeted that he was safe and nothing would stand in the way of Sudan's political transition. Citizens in the country who support Hamdok's administration came out in jubilation. It's not yet clear who carried out this attack. There were several damaged vehicles at the site of the blast, and officials have confirmed that no one was hurt. Hamdok was appointed to head Sudan's transitional government last August, a few months after the overthrow of longtime President Omar al-Bashir. News reports say since the appointment of Hamdok, his government has come up against resistance as it tries to implement economic reforms. Authorities have called it a terrorist attack and have launched an investigation to find out who was behind it. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, let's bring you some analysis on these developments in Sudan. We go live to Cairo now, where we're joined by Dr. Gamal Abdelkader, the Senior Research Fellow and Academic Advisor at the Al-Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, Dr. Gamal. This has been a very brazen attack. We're talking about gunfire, a projectile, all targeting the country's Prime Minister, clearly pointing to a precarious security situation in Sudan. But what do you believe the motive of this attack might have been?
Well, there is a statement made by a known movement called the Islamist Youth Movement, claiming responsibility of this attack. The authenticity of this statement cannot be asserted, but I would say it does indicate to the main kind of conflict currently splitting Sudan between the revolutionary forces now in power on the one hand and the Islamist forces who have been governing Sudan for the past 3 decades. Yes, the Islamists have been removed from power through a people's revolution in the Sudan, but the Islamists apparently still strong, still resisting, and apparently they should be politically blamed for that. And it does indicate how serious the situation in the Sudan, yet the conflict is still there, stability is still something that the Sudanese people should be working harder to achieve.
And Dr. Gamal, it was just in August that Sudanese people welcomed a transitional government. Do you think this attack, this attempted assassination of a prime minister, will derail the country's path towards democracy and its political transition?
Well, the transition in Sudan is essentially facing three kinds of challenges. The first one is the conflict against the Islamists who have been ruling the country for the past 30 years. And again, this assassination attempt is a manifestation of this conflict. But also, there is the economic challenge. Sudan is facing a serious economic crisis, and the Prime Minister Hamdouk has been trying to address this issue for the past 6 or 7 months with little success, and this is really a serious challenge in Sudan. The third and other serious challenge is the rebellion in the different parts of the countries, to the south, to the east, to the west. There are armed groups who are fighting against the government. Yes, there is peace talks taking place, ups and downs. It is very important for the Sudan to settle those conflicts peacefully. So if the Sudan can pass and survive those three challenges, perhaps democracy and the democratic transition in the Sudan will be successful. But still, these are three very serious challenges they have to deal with.
Indeed, some serious hurdles on the path to democracy. Thank you so much, Dr. Gamal Abdelkader, joining us there live from Cairo. Now, turning to news from Libya, the United Nations envoy to Libya has announced that he will be stepping down, citing stress and poor health. For nearly 3 years now, Qassam Salameh has been trying to broker peace in Libya, as CGTN's Adel El-Makhri reports.
Good afternoon.
On June 22, 2017, the United Nations announced a new person in charge of its support mission in Libya, Ghassan Salameh. It was an uphill battle from the start. Despite his service as an advisor to the UN for Iraq and Myanmar, not everyone in the region believed the former Lebanese culture minister could handle the conflict in the divided oil-rich nation. Salameh faced criticism throughout his tenure and struggled to gain support from either of Libya's warring sides.
Like his predecessors, Salameh too has failed to gain the trust of Libya's factions. Both the GNA and the LNA have accused him of supporting the other. He tried to create a middle ground and achieve a certain political vision in Libya, but the people on the ground did not want either.
Following the Berlin conference in January, Salameh began 3 tracks for negotiations: military, economic and political. But despite his efforts, both of Libya's rival factions eventually boycotted the proposed talks.
Well, unfortunately, Salameh's tenure did not only fail to reach any concrete outcomes, but also made the conflict worse in recent months. This has made people on the ground move towards armed conflict rather than talks.
Salameh in the past spoke of the lack of cooperation with an international community, especially those that backed either of Libya's warring sides.
The international parties involved in Libya have been supporting conflict and fueling division. If there was hope in Libya, Salameh would not have resigned.
Salameh is the 6th UN envoy to Libya as the conflict enters its 10th year. The UN will probably face difficulties in finding a replacement for Salameh. It needs someone fit to lead a conflict as complex as Libya and at the same time gain the entire confidence of the Security Council. Adel El-Makhri, CGTN, Cairo.
Today marks 1 year since the crash of an Ethiopian Airlines 737 MAX plane that triggered the worst crisis in Boeing's history. Flight 302 crashed shortly after takeoff, killing all 157 passengers on board. In the United States, a draft report blamed the plane's design for the disaster. A similar Lion Air crash of the same aircraft took place just months before in Indonesia, leaving 189 people dead. The two crashes have had an increasingly negative impact on one of the world's biggest airline companies, as the plane has been grounded globally. The company has since recorded billions in losses. The bereaved family members and friends of the crash victims are still waiting for answers, with piling lawsuits against Boeing. To mark the anniversary, a village near the crash site held a memorial in honor of those victims. Well, as Ethiopia marks 1 year since that crash, CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy takes us back to that fateful day.
March 10th, 2019 started out like many other mid-March days in Ethiopia, but as the day unfolded, it proved to be anything but ordinary. On this day, the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft, which operated the flight, crashed near the town of Bishoftu 6 minutes after takeoff, killing all the 157 people aboard. March 10th marks the first anniversary of Ethiopian Airlines crash. Gadisa Benti was an eyewitness who saw smoke billowing up the sky after the plane went down. The crash sparked a chain of events that would later cripple one of the world's biggest companies.
We have taken the right decision to ground the airplane, and the fact that we have taken that right decision was endorsed by the entire world, because we cannot put even a single life at risk.
Boeing is an incredible company. They are working very, very hard right now. And hopefully they'll very quickly come up with the answer. But until they do, the planes are grounded.
Relatives couldn't grasp the fact that their loved ones were dead. Many were burned beyond recognition and had to be identified through DNA. It was the second crash in 5 months by the new Boeing 737 MAX after a Lion Air crash in Indonesia killed 189 people when it nosedived into the sea. Preliminary report released by the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Authority revealed that faulty sensor readings and multiple automatic commands to push down the nose of the Boeing aircraft contributed to the fatal crash that left the crew struggling to regain control. The plane, once Boeing's fastest sailing jet, has been grounded globally since mid-March, costing the plane maker nearly $19 billion. Boeing is also facing numerous probes into the development of the aircraft by regulators, U.S. lawmakers, and the Department of Justice. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Your business news coming up next. South African Airways kick off a retrenchment process as the carrier battles to stay afloat. And Nigeria to cut its 2020 budget due to a massive drop in crude oil prices.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
In your business news, specialists appointed to save struggling South African Airways have embarked on a retrenchment process. The business rescue practitioners estimate over 4,700 employees are being consulted. The number of jobs that will be saved will be subject to negotiations. The rescue practitioners have been engaging with unions, most recently just this past weekend, in relation to the retrenchments and the intention of beginning the consultation process. The South African government placed SAA on voluntary business rescue last December. That's after the carrier experienced losses of over $1.6 billion over the past 6 years. Now, Africa's largest retailer says it's still committed to doing business on the continent, but it may have to close some of its operations. Following its latest results, Shoprite said it had suffered further losses from its African operations. Shoprite has stores in 14 countries across the continent, but only a handful reported a profit. South Africa remains the healthiest operation. CGTN's Sumitra Naidi spoke with the group CEO, Peter Engelbrecht.
Shoprite remains a leader in Africa, but it's had a tough time operating outside of South Africa.
A lot of it is cyclical. If one think about West Africa,
the depressed oil price, and then the biggest issue remains the currency and exchange differences. If one take a place like Angola, currency devaluation has been 185% over 2 years. Plus last year in October we had a 14% VAT introduced for the first time. So the consumer in a place like Angola is really under pressure.
In 2016, Angola contributed over 60% of the non-RSA profitability. Despite being the biggest drag now, Engelbrecht believes Angola remains an important operation in the long term. Nigeria, though, remains a concern.
We were tracking quite well, and then with great disappointment when the 5th of September happened with xenophobia, and then we lost up to about 60% of our customers in that country. We haven't got all of them back. We ended the period at a negative 8%, and in that country, different to Angola, is there was much more legislative and structural changes in economy and from the legislator that impacted the way that one does business there. So we have to rethink our model there.
Shoprite says it will need to rethink its African strategy.
We're currently reconsidering the way that we enter the different economies, and there is a specific one that we are reviewing and entertaining different proposals in terms of how we're going to go forward. Zambia, yes. We had a 14.7% local currency growth, very good. Local business is very sound, but once you convert that, you wipe out all of that, the good with the currency devaluation. We're still committed to the continent. We just not committed at all costs. And we are reviewing each of the countries. We have closed 5 stores in the last year. We did also, the immediate short term, of course, is to invoke cost saving. So we've renegotiated 17 of our rentals. We've been able to convert some of the rentals from dollar to local currency, and also some of the borrowings.
The retail giant says it's still bullish on Africa, but needs to work harder on navigating the tough terrain. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, South Africa.
Nigeria says it will cut its 2020 budget and ramp up oil production after a collapse in crude prices sparked by the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic. Africa's largest producer is facing major revenue shortfalls after oil prices plummeted far below its budgeted level of $57 a barrel. Before the latest collapse in oil prices, Nigeria was already struggling to boost growth after emerging from its worst recession in 2017. Pledges by the authorities in Africa's most populous nation, which relies on oil for about 90% of its foreign exchange earnings, have also failed to break the reliance on crude. Uganda has given China's National Offshore Oil Corporation an environmental clean bill of health to proceed with drilling and infrastructure construction work near Lake Albert. CNOOC is one of the companies licensed to develop the Kingfisher oil fields in western Uganda. It plans to pump as much as 40,000 barrels a day of crude from the field. With more on this, here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria.
The Environment Impact Assessment Certificate will now enable CNOOC to construct oil drilling platforms and crude oil pipelines along the shores of Lake Albert. However, Uganda's environment body says despite a clean environment bill passed to CNOOC, more care needs to be taken to avoid the destruction of the environment. Any oil spillage could threaten natural resources like fish or wetlands.
The pipeline construction is restricted to a certain air clearance area only. And after that, they have to reinstate it to before. And that, from the general ecological science, allows the biodiversity to record rise very, very fast.
CNOOC, the French oil firm Total, and British multinational Tullow are planning to extract about 6.5 billion barrels of oil from the Ugandan reserve. The National Environment Body says the oil companies should keenly follow the conditions set, warning that poor handling of oil waste could cause serious implications on the environment if not adhered to. China's CNOOC says the environment certificate is a positive step towards the development of the oil and gas industry in the country.
I believe this major milestone will definitely facilitate the whole process to see the first oil.
Uganda discovered oil in 2006, but production is yet to begin. The delays follow multiple disagreements between the government and oil companies over tax payments and revenue sharing. However, the negotiations are ongoing and all parties are expected to reach a final investment decision by the end of this month. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
China's Jingye Group has completed its takeover of British Steel, which will save over 3,000 jobs in the UK. The firm reportedly offered $65 million to buy the company after it collapsed and was placed under the control of the UK Insolvency Service last year. With the details, here's CGTN's Andrew Wilson.
The ceremony's over and the deal is finally done. It's taken a while, but China's multi-industrial conglomerate Jingye has now taken the reins at British Steel in the UK. The early promises are about partnership and global reach.
The purchase of British Steel, as far as Jingye is concerned, is about the group going global. Previously, our business was exporting steel from China. Now we want to have a production base in this market to serve the local market there.
British Steel is really connect a lot of people. It really touched the very soft part of local people. And I think I told Jingye people, it's also very important to live up to your social responsibility. You know, it's not only about business. It's not only about profit. It's about culture. You know, to learn from each other.
Jingye has long been interested in Scunthorpe's capabilities for high-quality rail track and girder production, so-called long steel, something the Chinese company does not manufacture at home. For workers and unions, it's been a difficult wait.
Life has gone on under an anxious cloud here in Scunthorpe and on Teesside since British Steel threw in the towel in May last year. Every day, staff have been coming in to do their jobs without any certainty over whether or not there would be the remotest possibility for full-time work down the line.
As it stands, Jingye has offered 3,200 staff renewed contracts, 100 have been found other work, and 400 have received redundancy letters, all coming into effect this week. Relief for some, disappointment for others.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Everybody's over the moon, we're keeping the jobs, and unfortunately not everybody has, but obviously feel for them as well. But yeah, it's good news for Scunthorpe, isn't it, and the people, obviously all the businesses that's connected with the company.
I myself was one of the many people what was looking at their emails, waiting, and then to see that, I'm sorry, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to offer you a contract.
The real prize is the figure of $1.5 billion in future investment, a promise that's been questioned enough times, but still seems to be part of the plan. One issue was British Steel's French operation that the government in Paris doesn't want to sell. It was feared to be a deal breaker. Clearly, that wasn't the case. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Scunthorpe.
Global stock markets posted their steepest fall since the 2008 financial crisis on Monday. The events that sparked the panic were the result of a clash between Saudi Arabia and Russia over what to do about oil prices, which have been tumbling due to the ongoing COVID-19 epidemic. CGTN's John Terrett has more from New York.
The story of the Monday session is that we had no idea how far down the Dow and the S&P 500 would open after the futures markets were frozen overnight. In the end, when 9:30 local time came, the Dow was down 1,800 points in pretty short order. That's 7%. The S&P 500 was down by 7% as well. That triggered an immediate stop down. For 15 minutes, the market trading was suspended. The first time in a very long time that has happened, and the first time ever under new stock exchange rules. When the market came back up, it fell a little bit more, but then stabilized to be down around 1,200 points. But towards the end of the day, it moved towards 2,000 points down. And the reason is COVID-19 appears to be spreading. People in New York taking it much more seriously now after a couple of serious news conferences over the weekend from the governor of the state and the mayor of New York City. And of course, the good old-fashioned 1970s-style oil shock with Russia and Saudi Arabia clearly not on the same page regarding production cuts. That was enough to bring crude oil down to around $31 a barrel, the lowest it's been since 1991. And you put those two things together and you have very, very severe pressure on the US markets. Here are the numbers. The Dow down 7.8% at the end of the session. NASDAQ 7.2, S&P 500 down by 7.6. The Dow is around 23,000.8 now, and this was the biggest one-day point drop ever, 2,013 points.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, how an all-woman band in Tunisia is challenging stereotypes.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
In Tunisia, a music band founded by a young and talented music professor invites women of all ages and social classes to sing traditional, classical and modern Tunisian songs. The club is known as the Xi Singing Club or Club de Chantal.
Rahma Benafana is a talented entrepreneur, singer and musician. She founded Club de Chantal for women to share her passion for music. The successful initiative has gone viral on social networks as well as theaters.
The club gathers women from all social classes, women doctors, lawyers, housewives, teachers, high school and university students. The love for art has united us. We are rehearsing together and singing nationwide.
Over 200 women aged 16 to 80 are singing a collection of traditional Tunisian songs from the 1920s to modern days. The number of new members is constantly on the rise as more women are joining the adventure.
I'm a lawyer and I joined the club for the positive vibes. This experience is unique because it brings together women of all ages and horizons.
I come for fun, to enjoy old songs with a modern touch. This is how women perpetuate traditional music.
Rahma believes her music has miraculous psychological benefits. This group therapy gives women the power and will to face everyday challenges.
Music has a direct psychological impact on one's life. El Singing Club has changed the lives of many women. Some retirees have a daily activity while others who are stressed at work can have fun through this special cultural activity.
Club de Chantal members have become known as the elegant women in traditional outfit. They are currently touring the country and singing for life, joy and fun. The founder of Club de Chantal for Women is a talented artist and a successful manager who has become an icon in the North African state. Her band is now rehearsing new covers and preparing to produce its own songs to conquer Europe, Africa and the Arab region. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Your sports news coming up after the break. Still ahead, South Africa's Proteas taming expectations ahead of Thursday's opening encounter against India.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Start with cricket news. South Africa completed a 3-0 series whitewash over